welcome to Lightning Lounge. My name is Bill Stanley. I'm a professor in political science and associate provost for faculty success. I like hosting these events. You'll get to learn about some of the work that your colleagues do. As I mentioned just a second ago, we may do the April 13th Lightning Lounge, which is our next up in person. So look for an announcement. And don't assume it's on Zoom, because it might not be, or it might only be secondarily on Zoom. We'll probably stream it if the location permits. So as usual, we have 4 presenters. They're going to present in about 7 minutes each, and we'll have some time for question and answer and discussion. And we usually just go clockwise or using the poster as our reference. And our first presenter is Richard White, and I'm going to embarrass him a little bit by mentioning that he has been awarded the 2021 Research and Creative Works Leadership Award. This is an award that was created a couple of years ago at the suggestion of the Faculty Senate Research Policy Committee to recognize the 2 faculty members who go through the promotion and tenure process in the previous cycle, who were just the most remarkable and distinguished in their research or creative works. And he was the professor, is the professor who was awarded that recognition. So I just wanted to mention that before he begins. So congratulations. So we'll hear first from Richard White. I'm possible against all odds, resilience, determination, and hope. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. So I guess I should just talk about how this all started. Early Light Media, a film company in Baltimore, was going to do a story on how the arts are underfunded and how it's vital that we support the arts. And someone at the Baltimore School for the Arts, which is my high school alma mater, said, well, you should talk to Richard White. We had a 45-minute conversation, and that turned into, we've changed our mind. We're going to do a movie about you. Lucky me, right? So they produced a movie called Raw Tuba about me and my life, which is now called Hi, I'm Richard Antoine White on the Magnolia Network, which led to I'm Possible, a story of determination, resilience, and believe me when I tell you, a tuba. And that's why we're here today. So I was on Trevor Noah, Today Show, NPR, PBS, you name it. I've been there. The only place I'm trying to get to is the New York Times and Oprah Winfrey. If anybody got any connections, please let me know. What I want everyone most is to read I'm Possible and feel like you are a superhero, whether you're an advantage or disadvantage. I want you to feel like there are no limitations. If you're not privy to my life, I grew up growing on the streets of Baltimore, homeless. I ate out of trash cans, would often store food under my tongue because it was so unpredictable as where my next meal would come from. I stuffed shoes size 12, too big, with newspapers to fit into a size at age 3. And oftentimes I'm asked, would I change any of that? No, it was the hand I was dealt, and I played it to the best of my ability. What I learned from my upbringing is that great people aren't born great, they grow great. And I also learned that life is fair because it's unfair to everyone. I get up every day and offer the world my very, very best, and I'm going to encourage you to offer your very, very best. In a moment of transparency, if it was up to me, I would play my Nintendo Switch, sit on my couch, and eat potato chips and just be a happy soul. But I get up every day and go to work because I don't want to deprive the world of the best version of me. I don't want to deprive you of the best version. I feel if I offer the world my best version, you offer the world your best version, that has to equal something magnificent. And I'm encouraging everyone to think in spite of instead of because of. Oftentimes, especially in our industry, we hear because of lack of funding, because of lack of people, because of resources, because of space, we can't. I'm encouraging everyone here to embrace my philosophy of in spite of the lack of funding, in spite of the lack of resources, in spite of the lack of people, I will do it. I will show you that I can do it because I can, and simply do it. We are often paralyzed by what I call fear. We get this paralysis of fear. I'm encouraging everyone to aim high, break records, and do it now. Procrastination is the arrogant assumption that God or the universe owes you another opportunity to do what you already had time to do. So get it done. I think along with this, and when we talk about success, we have to recognize and be true to our integrity. Along with success comes failing. And my acronym for fail, I expect to fail. When I fail, I'm collecting data. And my acronym for failing is finding an intended lesson in needed growth. What that means is I failed because there's something I needed to know that I didn't know that I now know so I can move forward. In all of this, I'm always asked particular questions when I do events like this. And the question is, Richard, after being all over the world, making history, what do you think your greatest accomplishment is? And I had never been asked this question. The CBS Evening News report asked me. I paused, and then I weepingly replied, my job as a professor, teacher, and mentor, because every day I get to go to school and make a difference in a kid's life, because that's what someone did for me. Which leads me to my next topic here in my 7 minutes, and I want you all to embrace this. My next book will be called The 5 Educative Languages of Teaching. You might fit one of these, or you might fit a couple of these in your profile. The dreamer is one who thinks the impossible is always possible. The storyteller, one who gives hope by telling stories. The motivator, obviously, this guy makes you feel like a champion, is usually the cheerleader. And the truth teller, which is probably my favorite, that no matter what, they're going to tell you the truth. And what you're going to get from that is that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off, but you'll be better for it afterwards. And then the freestyler. There's no one size fits all to what we do, and we're learning that with COVID. I would like to share a Bill Gates story. Bill Gates is quoted saying, I will always choose a lazy person to do a difficult job because he or she will always find the easiest way to do it. Now there's perspective for you, right? So I think there's no one size that fits all. And last but not least, when I do these, I like to give a serious takeaway. And the takeaway that I would like every one of my colleagues to take away today is, I believe there are thousands of problems in the world, but I also believe that 99% of them can be solved if we were just kind to one another. I am proud to be a Lobo. May we all keep believing, achieving, and reaching new heights together. You are stuck with me. I plan to have a raw tuber ranch and retire here, Lobo for life. And I will end by saying the raw tuber ranch is a place of fellowship where you don't have to check your personality at the door. You come on down to the raw tuber ranch, which would be in Los Padillas, by the way. We found 21 acres and 24/7 beer, ramen noodle, and chili. Now I want to share this with you. Me being a tuba player, I didn't know I was supposed to have noise ordinance permits, or I need a permit to sell beer. I was like, I'm just going to have some beer with my friends, or chili. So the city acknowledged me, gave me an acknowledgement day, and they are 100% on board with the Raw Tuba Ranch. So when we're having a tough day at school, I expect to see all of you at the Raw Tuba Ranch. Thank you for this time to speak to you today, and go Lobos.
Thank you. Let's open it up to questions, comments, in addition to the hearts that are popping up on the screen. So I'll jump in with one, as I sometimes do. I resemble the procrastination remark. Your wording was pretty sharp. What advice do you give to folks whose procrastination is rooted in perfectionism and not wanting to let something go?
I would say start simple. And I think the simplest way to do it is just make a challenge to yourself. If there are 365 days in the year, say, I'm going to get better at one thing every day. And it could be the way you yawn or the way you go to sleep that evening. But make a record of something that you intentionally want to get better at. It could be the way you're sitting at work, the way you get up out of your chair to get some exercise. And then in 1 year, be proud that you can say, I got better at 365 things. And that will lead to less procrastination. And also, I think we procrastinate because we think we have more time. Every second, every minute, every day, every hour, every week, every month counts. And I think you owe it to yourself to put your very best forward, because you don't want to deprive, like I said earlier, the world of the best version of yourself. And I think what you want to realize when you have that procrastination is the cumulative effect. So it might not be for you, but it might be for the next person and the rest of your colleagues. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard Hyatt's got his hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Richard. Pleasure to meet you. Sorry, I got to get this little hand off the window here because it won't go away. You'd mentioned that that education was what brought you out, and I'm assuming that maybe there was a very specific instructor, professor, grade school teacher who brought you into this window of get it done and clarity.
I think every stranger, every teacher, every mentor I give credit to, I believe that it takes a village, and I'd be a fool to sit here and tell you I did it myself. The one thing that every institution has in common is that no one ever gave up on me. I think oftentimes we are afraid to go to the point of exhaustion. I'm encouraging everyone to go to the point of exhaustion, because if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. It's at the point of exhaustion where new beginnings happen. And believe me, I drove some teachers to the point of exhaustion, but I had a village, and it takes that village to where they could tag team and help. And I credit every single mentor in my life for helping me to overcome and achieve. When you reach the point of exhaustion, you have nothing left. So now you're learning things that you didn't previously know, and that leads to new heights and new elevation. Excellent question.
There was a question in the chat. What is a song or performance that gets you going?
Oh, what an awesome question. So if you don't know, my dissertation is titled If Bach Had Had a Tuba. So I love Baroque music, and they kept sending it back saying, you put too many hads. I said, no, I didn't. Please leave my title alone. If Bach had had a tuba. So Baroque music and Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, makes me very happy. So it's my favorite music. It's my place of happiness. That's the music that gets me going, and realize that the tuba wasn't invented until 1835. So it didn't exist during Bach's time. So I have to steal everybody else's music and play it, but hopefully they don't mind.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Those inspiring remarks. The perspective we need to hear now. Okay, our next speaker is Monika Nitsche, professor of mathematics and statistics, and her talk is entitled Vortices, Drops, and Intervals. Monika.
Hi, I'm glad to meet you all and be here, and what an inspiring talk. Thank you, Richard. I have some slides prepared. Tell me if there's any problem seeing them. So I want to tell you about vortices, drops, and intervals. Here are some pictures of vortices. I hope you can see my mouse. To the left, you have, bottom left, you have the vortices that shed from the wing of an airplane. These vortices are actually what limits the landing, the time between landing and takeoff of planes, because they're very dangerous for planes following another plane, and it can lead to crashes, as did happen. Here is a picture where you see these in flight. You're actually not seeing the vortices over here. You're seeing the center line of the vortex where the velocities are large, pressures are low, so you see condensation. That's what this is. Here are vortices in the atmosphere, visualized by the clouds. This is above the Flatirons in Boulder. These are vortices in superfluids. When you take a superfluid in the bin and you rotate it very fast, you're creating these line vortices. Here on the bottom right, you see vortices and blood flows. So vortices are a fundamental aspect of fluid dynamics, and much of my work is trying to understand fluid and vortex motion. The fluids are characterized by what's called a Reynolds number. And in all of these cases, the Reynolds number is very large. For example, in flow past the Boeing 737, which this is not, the Reynolds number would be about 10 to the 8th. These superfluid vortices behave as if they're where zero viscosity, what I'm going to call Reynolds number being infinity. And in large blood vessels, these Reynolds numbers are fairly large. In small vessels, the Reynolds numbers are fairly small. So that's vortices. So let me move on to my next slide. So these other types of flows are drops in microfluidic devices. And here we're actually in an opposite limit, where these are of the size, these devices of the size of 5 to 10 micrometers. And because of the small length scales, the Reynolds number is actually very small. Here is an experiment of double droplets that are being extruded through a nozzle. And what these, here you're seeing these double droplets going out, and they break at opening. And what's of interest is that if you have a drug in the interior that you want to deliver, such as when you have a nasal spray or something, you want to know when do these drops break and how do they break. Another related problem that I'm interested in is the use of electrophoresis in small devices to separate cancerous cells from blood cells. The blood cells are also of the size 7 to 9 micrometers. So these are the types of flows I'm interested in. And I'm actually interested in, I've looked at a lot of the two limits, the infinite Reynolds number, so very large Reynolds number, and the zero Reynolds number. and in these limits, you can track the flow by interfaces. And let me just show you you discretize, this is flow past a wall, you discretize the flow and you track particles such as this red guy over here. I'm showing you another red guy coming off at the bottom left over here. And the point over here is that it gets very close to the wall. These particles can get very close to the wall. Here is a double droplet in one of these microfluidic devices. And again, it gets very close to the wall, especially at opening. So what they both have in common is that the velocity at x0 is an integral over all the interfaces involved. And here I'm going to give you an example of a simple flow where x0 is far from the boundary. And I told you that x0 is an integral. An integral is just, if you're given a function, it's the area underneath this curve. Typically, you know this function only at discrete grid points. You can approximate the area by what's called the trapezoid rule, which works really well, which just consists of approximating these functions by piecewise linear. And the error that you make over here in red for error is fairly small. However, if x0 is close to the boundary, these functions look almost singular. And if you sample at discrete points, the error that you make with the trapezoid is very large. So this is a problem that has been around for, lots of people have been looking at this problem because it has significant consequences. Over here, I have a cloud of particle approaching a plate, and instead of doing what they're supposed to do, going around the plate, they actually go through the plate. Over here, I have these double droplets going through the nozzle, and they don't do what they're supposed to. They start to interconnect over here, and they don't behave like real problems would. And at the bottom, I've shown you the types of problems that you get because of this near singularity. Okay. So I have been working on this problem, and I've got what I think is a great solution to it. And I just want to show you a little bit the difference that makes. Over here, on the left, you have the trapezoid rule with particles going through it. On the right, you have these improved quadratures that don't let any particles go through it. Here on the top is the trapezoid rule. Over here is a corrected rule. You get no crossing over here, and you get much closer to what you're supposed to get. And over here, the flow past a plate and the vortices forming at the separating in each end of this plate. I can resolve that very well with these. So that's the kind of stuff that I do for fun. Now, I wanted to end by showing something. I can't see my picture. So I want to show you something. Okay, my last 30 seconds. If you wonder about the fun of math, I want to introduce you to the joy of X. Okay, Stephen Rhodes is a wonderful writer. You'll read about, not just the dunks of Michael Jordan, but did OJ do it? Shifting alliances in Europe before World War I. How often we change a mattress, how many to date before settling down. So he's got something for everybody. He also has a wonderful set of podcasts of interviews with all sorts of scientists, and they are posted on our website. And I just want to put some sample of these interviews. They're all fairly long, but if you have a long ride home, I encourage you to take a look at that. So that's my spiel, and I want to end with that. Thank you. Sorry if I took more time than I was supposed to.
Sorry, lost my cursor on my second screen. It's like, where is it? Thank you very much for that. James Stone has a question. James, go ahead.
Hi, Monika. Thank you so much for that. I'm not a scientist. I work in the film department, but I thought your slides were very beautiful.
Thank you.
Especially, and they're like little artistic works by themselves, especially the vortices. And you probably know that a lot of artists have been very fascinated by vortexes, the vortex as an image, particularly somebody who's close to my heart, which is Alfred Hitchcock. There are a lot of vortices in his movie Vertigo. Yeah. And he loved to do aerial shots of staircases that look like vortices. I guess my question to you is, do you appreciate this stuff on an aesthetic level as well as a scientific level?
Definitely. I love making pretty pictures. Spirals are great. So, yes, I do think that's a great, it's important to convey it. It also should, do something that actually gets the message across in a good picture. I think it tells more than a lot of words. So thank you.
Thank you.
Pamela.
I'm really grateful for your presentation, Monika, and I wondered if you had connected with Jim Thomas in physics at all. He's dealing with some really interesting problems around small particle attachment and patterns of attachment on the cellular and subcellular level. And I would think that your vortex research would be particularly interesting in connection with his work.
Yes, thank you. I also need to do chemical engineering because I think they have people interested in these kind of problems. So thank you for that.
And I thought of it because the modeling that he's been doing seems continuous with the kind of modeling that you're doing. And he's got a pretty big data set at this point.
Great, thank you.
David Weiss.
Hi, Monika. That was fascinating. I have a question. One of the early visuals that you showed, I believe, was cancer cells in a bloodstream. Is that right?
Yes.
Are you working, or are there like, say, medical physicists or just people in the Health Sciences Center, for example, that are working with you or could use your type of research in cancer treatments?
Yeah. So I'm not working on it right now, but there are people that have tried to do these models. So the idea is, how do you design these devices so that you best separate the cells? And part of the problem is this near singularity. So it includes electric fields. You have to use electrophoresis to separate these. And that's something that I'm interested in getting into. So, but there are some works and they're not very highly resolved, but I think there's room to do a lot of work there.
That's great. It's really cool. Thank you.
Monika, it seems like a lot of refinements in aerodynamics in recent years have had, at least in like commercial aircraft, have had to do with dealing with the wingtip vortices. Are there applications of what you're doing to modeling those phenomena better?
Yes, so that is certainly part of the goal, to get insight into the vortex dynamics. Now in the wingtip vortex, you have a 3D layer of vorticity that rolls up, and you have what's called a horseshoe vortex, and a lot of simulations, 3D simulations, are done using cruder models, but yes, we certainly are trying to gain insight into those models. And there are some simple models that simulate the wing using, so you actually reproduce a little bit more of the types of vortices that you get behind an airfoil. So using the types of models that I use. So.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I want to second the observation. The slides are really beautifully done. Thank you. All right, next we'll hear from Jessica Fiezelle, Associate Professor in Political Science. Title is Scrolling Headlines and Clicking Stories, Differential Content and Consequences from the Enhanced Scrollability, I think you just invented a word, of news. Jess.
I did. Let me just share my presentation. There we go. Does that look good to everybody? Hi, friends. It's nice to see everybody. And thanks for coming to listen to all of us talk today. I think my talk will be a little bit different. I'm going to focus on a new paper that I just sent out to hopefully get published. And so if you have any major criticisms, I don't want to hear them quite yet, but I would love to hear any ideas and feedback, really and truly. So this is part of a bigger project that I have conducted with Katie Searles at Louisiana State University and her research team, because as you'll see in a second, it involves quite a bit of data gathering and neat, innovative sort of methods. So like many great origin stories, the origin story for this paper and this study really began late at night, riddled with anxiety in bed. And I was in bed and I was reading my phone, as you shouldn't do, but many of us often do. And I was sort of scrolling through a bunch of headlines. And I came across a headline that was alarming and it was worrying. And I clicked on it and I read the article. And then after I read the article, I realized that the alarming and scary headline really wasn't that scary of a thing once I read the story. And so it led me to two questions that guide this. One is that I'm wondering if headlines are actually systematically different in their content and tone from stories. And if they are headlines or headline clickers, headline scrollers and story clickers, are they living in fundamentally different information environments as a result of these systematic differences between the headline content and the story content? And then if that is true, then what are the political consequences for this, if any? So I want to back up a little bit and talk about what I mean by scrollability. And I do think that I invented this word. Maybe, I don't know. It is essentially the affordance that digital media has allowed you to scroll through news feeds. And so increasingly, websites like Facebook and Google News and Apple News and Yahoo all use feed-based approaches to deliver news. And in these feeds, news enters a queue or a lineup based on timeliness of the stories, popularity of the stories, or user-based algorithms that generate the list of stories in your feed. So importantly, news feeds are driven by competition for clicks, which sustain advertising revenue in our digital environment today. And just as news producers have changed the way that they package news stories in a scrollable environment, so too have news consumers changed the way that they interact with news. So a recent study by the American Press Institute actually found that 6 out of 10 survey respondents report not reading beyond the headline at all. So many people actually are headline scrollers instead of folks who will actually click through to a story and perhaps read the entire story. So studying this at the individual level is tricky. I need not only a survey to understand individual level public opinion and political behavior, but I also need to know which stories people were exposed to and which stories they clicked on. And so from the civilian side or even the academic side of this, it's very hard to get these data. So what we did instead was create a replica news portal with my friends and colleagues at Louisiana State. This portal was designed to mimic Google News interface. We designed it to be as realistic as possible. The news stories in our portal were automatically added to our portal by a PHP script that checked RSS feeds of Google News every 30 minutes, 24 hours a day for 8 days between the period of May 29th and June 5th, 2016. So over the course of this week, the portal included a total of 9,846 news stories with an average publication delay of 27 minutes in real time. And most importantly, the participants in our study could scroll through the news portal for headlines and click on full stories if they were inclined to, and we could track all of it. We recruited the subjects for our study using Amazon's Mechanical Turk, and it was restricted to American participants only. The participants took a pre-test asking for a bunch of questions about public opinion and demographics, et cetera. Then they were asked to use this portal for 1 week, and then they took a post-test. And at the end of the study, the total N was about 1,051 participants. So to my first question, how does at all headline content differ from story content? So to analyze this, we compare the headline content to the story content for all of the stories and headlines published to our portal in the week that we looked at. So that's 9,486 stories and headlines. And we analyze this using an increasingly popular text as data method called sentiment analysis, which codes massive bodies of text according to some criteria, in this case, tone. And I also have some subsequent analysis that looks at more specific sort of emotions as well. I use the aptly named Lexicoder Sentiment Dictionary, which we lovingly refer to as LSD in political communication, which categorizes the text as either positive, negative, or neutral using a bag of words technique. So for example, a positive headline would be something like UNM wins SEC baseball tournament. And a negative headline would be something like released Trump testimony on Trump University could trigger video deposition battle. So this is a mosaic plot showing you the results of the sentiment analysis. In this mosaic plot, the larger dark blue squares represent categories where there are more cases than would be expected if there were no difference in sentiment between the articles on the top and the headlines on the bottom. On the left-hand side here, you can see this figure shows that the headline information environment on the bottom is significantly more negative than the article environment on top, with 38% of the headlines categorized as negative compared to just 33% of the articles. On the other side here, you see that the article environment is categorized positively more often than the headline environment, with 36% of the articles coded positive compared to 21% of the headlines. However, the article environment is categorized, or excuse me, also, not however, as a testament to how scrollability of news has sort of changed newsmakers' decisions and how they package stories. We also find that people are significantly more likely to click on negative headlines compared to positive ones, thus incentivizing newsmakers to continue to sensationalize headlines and make them more negative, which thus is more attractive and clickable and profitable. So people who tend to scroll headlines more live in a more negative information environment, whereas people who tend to click through to stories and read articles are exposed to a more positive tone of information in their environment. And so we ask, what are the political consequences of living in these different information environments, if any? So we measure the influence of these different information environments on 7 different outcome variables that fall into 2 broader categories: trust and concern and political behavior. So for trust and concern, we use 4 specific dependent variables: whether people trust mainstream news, whether they're politically cynical, their perception that there are problems in the nation, and their overall life satisfaction. To measure political behavior, we use affective political polarization, political participation, and political knowledge, which is an index of several different measures. We predict these using, we predict these using a click ratio. So how many you click over how many stories you're exposed to in total. And we did some cool models. Cut to the chase. The answer to this question is that there is actually very little difference between people who are headline scrollers dominantly and story clickers dominantly. The only difference we find is that people who have a higher click ratio have a lower score on their affective polarization. Or in other words, if you're likely to click through to a story and read that story, you are less likely to be affectively polarized, which is a term that we use to describe sort of in-party love and support and out-party hatred. So it sort of tempers some of the political fire in the United States. To conclude, headlines tend to be more negative than stories. Doom scrolling is not actually correlated with an increasing sense of imminent doom. So carry on. And headlines are quite informative. Reading stories does not gain you that much more political knowledge when compared to just reading the headlines, at least with the measures that we use. And finally, the popularity of negative headlines will continue to transform newsrooms in an attention economy. And so with that, that's me, and that's my email if you guys have any further questions or follow-up.
So Nikki Mathis has a question.
Hi, I really enjoyed that talk and that presentation. I was wondering if you worked in the shareability of the news that your participants were working with, in terms of, if I was more likely to be a headline scroller, would I be more likely to share a story? And then the impacts on the social media bubble and the filter bubble that we're all in.
Nikki, that's a great question. No. To answer your question, no, we didn't work in any measures about shareability, but there is other work that does show that negative stories tend to be shared more frequently than positive stories. So the environment is negative, and that's unfortunate, but maybe not so bad. And I can't remember your second question.
Oh, no, that was basically it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for the question.
David.
Yes, that was great. And I have so many questions and comments, and we can talk later. Yeah, we'll talk later. I have too many. Loved it. A million questions and comments. We'll talk.
Thank you. Take me out for lunch.
James.
Yes, my question is this: what are the have you done any study on what negative words people click on the most? What words get people excited to click on those headlines?
Ooh, this is a good question. So what we found actually is that the headlines that are clicked most frequently in further analysis tend to be headlines that feature sad words. And so they have this big sort of bag of words, or a dictionary essentially, that the machine will use to compare your text to this existing known body of words to be sad or whatever, positive, negative. And so sad headlines tend to generate a lot of clicks, and so do anxious headlines. So within sort of the broader context of what's negative, it's really sad and anxiety that generate a lot of clicks, but anger actually wasn't a significant predictor of higher click rates, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It does, presumably because we're all angry all the time. We don't notice the difference.
Just nice latent level of anger.
Thanks. It looks like there's a a hand up in the Darcy, Jamie, Marigold, and Maria room.
Yes. Welcome to our hangout. We're really looking forward to an in-person lightning lounge. We decided to jump on that and hang out all together. Jessica, your work is awesome. And our question is there a difference in the way the articles are written so that there's sort of more positive, negative information at the start of articles? So I was relating to your laying in bed sort of personal connection to your research, thinking about how I very often read only the very first third of an article. And I was wondering if you think there's any sort of sense to the ways that news articles roll out in terms of their positive, negative measures.
Your audio is a little touch and go, so I'm gonna fill in a lot of gaps. But I think there are definitely decisions being made in the newsroom about what stories make the cut for the nightly news and what stories end up on the floor. And by large measure, the stories that come through are sensational and interesting and often more negative in tone. In high school journalism, you learn, if it bleeds, it leads. So by default, probably the stories that are included tend to be a little bit more negative than the world around us in reality. And I missed the rest of your question, but maybe you could put it in the chat. I do see one question in the chat about whether people read through to the end. And unfortunately, I don't know. All I have data on, unfortunately, is whether they clicked through and presumably read a little bit more, but I don't have data on whether they read all the way through to the end of the story, which I would love to have, but don't.
Marissa Lucero.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi.
So seeing that you looked at, a lot of headlines that were pre-pandemic, do you think if we looked at post-pandemic, even though we're not there yet, that would have an impact on results?
I don't know, because I would imagine that the same decisions are being made in terms of how to craft headlines. The same decisions are being made to make them negative and somewhat sensational so that people will click on them and therefore generate more advertising revenue. And I don't know that the underlying content necessarily would cause any difference in that, at least not in the aggregate. It's a great question. I haven't really thought a lot about how COVID impacts this, but it's a good one.
Okay, and last question for Monika Nitsche.
I was just wondering if, if people can determine how long people are looking at an article. Maybe you can't tell if you're reading to the end, but at least how long do you stay on it?
That is a good question. I think we actually might have that, but I would have to go back and check. And I think the tricky part with that is that we assume that somebody would read if they're on it, and we can't really know. So at least I know that someone's clicking through, and that's the limitation, unfortunately, but I don't have to make any assumptions about how much information they're actually consuming. Good question. All right, thanks so much, you guys. That was fun.
Thanks very much. And if you have other questions, feel free to email them to Jessica. Yeah, in particular, I think Eric Earhart wanted to see the summary slide again at some point. So maybe you could show that to him or something. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks very much. I'm glad that it's safe to doom scroll. I will resume. So our next presenter is James Stone, Chair of Film and Digital Arts, and his talk is entitled New Directions in Digital Media Education. James, floor is yours.
Okay. Can you see that okay?
Looks good.
All right. Lovely. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to chat to you a bit about what we're doing, innovative things, new things we're doing in the Film and Digital Arts Department. I'm happy to say we have unprecedented numbers of students to work with right now. We have students who are coming to UNM to learn how to be movie makers, but also, and I don't know if this is well known, we also have classes where we teach them to be animators and game developers. We're also teaching students to be video game makers, designers, and thinkers. And our enrollment is really up in a big way, and it has been over the last 5 years. There are various reasons for that, which I'll go into. Last year, we had 1,600 students coming through our classes, and currently our total majors and pre-majors are around 500, which is double what it was 5 years ago. So something is going on. And we have more out-of-state students than ever. I often get phone calls from California and Texas and other places where students are saying, we've heard a lot about what's happening in New Mexico. We'd like to come there. I was going to go to NYU. I was going to go to UCLA. I was going to go to USC, these big film schools. But actually what you're doing in New Mexico is very intriguing right now. Now, one reason, apart from all our great teaching that we're doing, is that we have such a growth industry in New Mexico right now. And by the way, the pictures that you're seeing on this presentation are some of our students and some of our student work. They're stills from our movies. But as you may know, the New Mexico film industry is growing exponentially right now. Last year, there was a $623 million spend in New Mexico film productions, which broke all previous records. And Netflix, of course, is here in town in Albuquerque. Albuquerque is Netflix's only US production hub. They make movies, of course, all over the world, but in Albuquerque, they have a studio complex, which they don't have anywhere else. Many of our students are working at that studio complex as interns and in writers' rooms and as production assistants in lots of capacities. NBC Universal doesn't get talked about too much, but they have a studio space in downtown Albuquerque. There's a lot of buzz about New Mexico. If you read a bit about the film industry in this country right now, you hear Albuquerque a lot, you hear New Mexico a lot. The Hollywood Reporter ranked New Mexico as a film hotspot. And this is the most remarkable thing for me. For 4 years in a row now, Movie Maker magazine, which is quite an influential trade magazine, has named Albuquerque the best place for filmmakers to live and work in the United States. So not LA, not New York, not Georgia, but right here in Albuquerque. So we are serving students, I think, in innovative ways. We partner with industry, the city, and the state to do that. And so we're always collaborating. We have produced new internships for students with lighting and grip houses around town, at post-production facilities. We're getting students jobs while they're students. They seem to want that. Of course, we're getting our alumni into some pretty remarkable jobs too, but there are many students who work with one foot on the campus, as it were, and one foot in the film industry. We have decided that we need to be teaching set readiness for that reason. So we teach crew skills in a way that we didn't used to. We teach on-set procedures. We want students to be able to step onto a film set and know the protocols, to know how to behave and what the etiquette of a film set is. And if they cannot get a job, if they cannot get onto film sets, we want to give them that experience anyway. And for that, we give them something called the show, which is a new type of class that we offer, which is a large-scale, hands-on filmmaking experience for students. And one of the best experiences I've ever had as a teacher was on the set of the show last summer, standing behind a cinematographer, as that cinematographer was looking at the monitor and saying to a group of prospective, would-be cinematographers, what do you think of that shadow there? And what do you think of this lighting? And how should we do this differently? Students are actually getting to shadow industry professionals in our classes. Now, we also have something we call the Mentor Series, where we're inviting people from the industry to come and talk to our students, to mentor them, to tell them how to get into the industry. We also have something called the Sitcom Boot Camp, which is headed by one of our alumni, actually. He's a Hollywood filmmaker. His name is Brian Levant. And within 6 weeks, he takes students from really nothing to have created a full sitcom within 6 weeks. And they do a stage table read at the end of that. So we do all this by forging relationships with the Albuquerque Film Office, with the New Mexico Film Commission, and also the union in town here. IATSE 480 is the crew union. We have good relationships with them we're forging. And the Stagecoach Foundation, which is George R.R. Martin's nonprofit, which is about getting more New Mexicans into the film industry. One thing we're doing, which I think is quite new and quite different, is we're creating alternative revenue streams for the department. We have created a number of videos and animations for different entities at UNM, UNM Children's Hospital being one of those, UNM STEM Gateway, and many more of those. We've made extra money basically for the department doing that. And one other thing that we're doing is collaborating with UNM's Rainforest Innovations. Now, we're commercializing our research, which is something that often happens in the sciences. It doesn't often happen in the arts. And so we are creating a show, which we're calling Driftine, and we're hoping to sell that to a streaming service and commercialize our research in that way. I think we're having an enormous impact on the quality of life around this state, not only for our alumni who are enjoying success on crews throughout New Mexico and at different renowned institutions such as Lucasfilm, Industrial Light and Magic, and Google, but also on the lives of BIPOC and underserved communities. We're having students from those communities telling their story in our classes, and those students are gaining entry to an industry that has traditionally been overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. And as you see from some of the pictures I've been putting up here, a lot of our students do not fit that particular profile. And I believe we're doing what we can to enhance UNM's national and international reputation. We recently had a student who appeared in the renowned Forbes magazine 30 Under 30 edition. Her name is Graciela Ruiz. She's an associate producer and a very a big mover and shaker in the games industry. And we had a student take their movie to the Cannes Film Festival fairly recently. So, you know, the UNM name, the Film and Digital Arts name, is getting out there. And I really think that ultimately we are having quite an effect on the economy of the state. As we all know, the New Mexico state economy is fairly limited. But one thing that's really growing and doing very well is film and digital media. And we are training the new film crews, which does turn out to be well-paid work, and in a state which is often at the bottom, you know, the bottom of the list of 50 states when it comes to poverty and people who are not in well-paid work. The great thing about the film industry is that last year, approximately 75% of crew in New Mexico were New Mexico residents, with an average wage of over $56,000. So it's helping the economy, it's helping families in New Mexico. And lastly, I just want to give you a little snapshot of what we're doing right now. We're growing, as you know, so we're searching for 2 new assistant professors as we speak. We are building a state-of-the-art post-production lab with a successful PERC grant that we obtained this last year. And we're also working with the business school, working with Anderson to create an MBA in film and digital arts. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. Questions or comments? Let's see. There's one in the chat. How much is FDMA working with theater and music on such projects?
Well,
Yeah, Richard. Yeah. Go ahead.
We do work with them. In fact, I had a meeting just last week with Theatre and Dance about how we can approach Netflix together, because what we would like is a more formal relationship with Netflix. We have lots of students working for them, and we would love to create content for them, but we would love to have a pipeline, of interns that we could rely upon going to Netflix. And we're trying to figure out how to forge that relationship now, along with Theatre and Dance.
Richard, go ahead.
I think we're just scratching the surface. If you're talking video games, man, we have to be making these soundtracks with your newly grown department in terms of filmmaking and video making. I think once we get a reputable recording studio, we should all sit down with the music department and digital media department, because this is a game changer.
Yeah, that's right, Richard. Our new post-production facility that I mentioned, it's built around the idea of interdisciplinarity. So we want to see you in it. You're invited.
So there was a question from the faculty club. Are there concerns about the Rust shooting incident harming New Mexico's reputation for filmmaking, and what's being done to address that?
Yeah, well, we have done a lot to address it. We revamped our safety protocols right after the Rust shooting. We had to make sure that students really knew what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. I heard a little bit at the beginning. Certain people in Hollywood were taking that moment to say, well, look at these cowboys out in New Mexico. Look, they don't know what they're doing. They took that opportunity, but I didn't hear much of that, actually. I don't think it's really harmed us. Most of what I hear about the New Mexico industry is very positive. And actually, that was, as you may know, a kind of outside group. There were some local people who worked on that production, but I don't think for that reason that it wasn't really considered a New Mexico production in that way. And certainly it did not speak for the kinds of productions that we do. They're very safety conscious, etc. So, but yeah, we have to be vigilant about that.
Thanks. There was one more from Malatun. Could you speak a bit more about the research and creative works component of the program, building on the previous question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that is really getting a lot of traction at the moment is giving students the ability to work on a large scale set. And the aforementioned class entitled The Show is probably one of the most thrilling pieces of research that we're involved in at the moment. It gives students the opportunity to head up different departments. A student will be head of camera, or a student will be head of costume and makeup or whatever. And they get to understand the day-to-day workings of a set. They get to understand the protocols. They get to understand the language. The kinds of things that you can really only learn generally when you get into the workforce. Most of the time, film school didn't really teach you that. So we think we're doing something pretty innovative to give you the day-to-day skills, the day-to-day awarenesses that you wouldn't necessarily get in the school setting. So that's something that, and we've got tremendous feedback from students saying, this is the best thing I did while I was there. But as I said, we're also getting people onto real sets as well at the same time. So, 90% really of the large amount of students that we now have are coming out of our program having had some sort of hands-on on-set experience. Are we expanding costume design? Well, we have, periodically, we've had students who have been particularly interested in that area. And so they've really pushed that. I mean, we had a student, I think about 3 years ago, who had her own fashion design company. So she brought that to the table. I would love to expand in all sorts of directions. And actually one area we're trying to expand in is set design. Set design and construction seems to be a big need at the moment with crews in New Mexico. So you'll see us expanding into that realm. But yeah, costume and makeup will come. It'll come.
Great. Well, I would like to thank all of our presenters today for inspiring presentations. We had a comment in the chat earlier that one of our attendees, Jill Morford, was in a vortex from these, and I appreciate that. Really great. Appreciate all your contributions and all that you are doing for the university and our students. And I look forward to seeing you all again, maybe in person on April 13th. So thanks very much.